Hello, and welcome to Forward Fest and to this Biotech Spotlight, Startup, Scale Up, and Growth. I'm Mary Carbine with Discovery to Product at the UW-Madison. Discovery to Product is part of the Innovate network at the University of Wisconsin. And we're presenting this panel along with our partner, the Forward Bio Institute. Both the Innovate Network and the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, or WARF, are proud to be Forward Fest sponsors. We'd also like to thank the festival major sponsors, the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce, M3 Insurance, Madison Gas and Electric, Nieder and Boucher, Swink, Urban Land Interests, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, Whipfly, and the Wisconsin Union. The Innovate Network is a group of UW-Madison affiliated organizations, and we work together to support innovation, entrepreneurs, and startups. At Discovery to Product, we provide training, grants, and mentoring for UW-Madison innovators and entrepreneurs. But many Innovate Network organizations are also resources for entrepreneurs in the community, as well as at the university. So Innovate Network member organizations provide services to community entrepreneurs like accelerating your life sciences startup at Forward Biolabs, or support for Wisconsin early stage tech businesses from the Center for Technology Commercialization, or space and facilities for tech startups at University Research Park. I know you will learn a lot from our really terrific panelists today. I also encourage you to explore learning opportunities and resources from the Innovate Network, and you'll see that at a link that we'll throw in the chat. The network is here to support the local ecosystem and entrepreneurs like you. So enjoy the panel, and now I'm going to hand it off to my colleague and panel moderator, Aaron Olver.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Aaron Olver. I'm the managing director here at University Research Park. If you're not familiar with us, University Research Park is a 501c3 that's affiliated with the University of Wisconsin. And our job is to help create environments where technology companies can flourish. To support the technology research coming out of the university and to help the university cultivate jobs and growth in research and science and technology. This is a really fun panel for me for a couple of reasons. Not only do we have a star-studded panel lined up for you of a bunch of experts and leaders in the life science field here in Madison, but they also have all worked for companies that currently reside in Research Park. So I am really looking forward to this conversation. Let me introduce them to you. Carter Cliff is a serial entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of Vascugen, a company that's committed to developing treatments for patients suffering from incurable diseases, including the leading cause of limb amputation. He's been involved with a number of companies, including Opsis Therapeutics, which worked to reverse blindness disorders of the retina. He was the director of business development for Fujifilm Cellular Dynamics, where he worked on a pipeline of induced pluripotent stem cell-based therapeutic programs. And he helped found RPRD Diagnostics and Dionomy Therapeutics. To me, Cellular Dynamics is a classic example of UW-Madison research leading to a WARF patent, breakthrough technology, being licensed to a startup at University Research Park, scaling here. So that's a great story. And Vascugen recently graduated from Forward Biolabs, which is one of the newest incubators here at the park, and have started building out their own facilities. So welcome, Carter. Tom Foti is here with us today. He is the president of the protein business unit at Aldevron. Tom recently told me he has worked in the University Research Park for over, should I say the number, Tom? 29 years. So we're pretty sure he started in middle school. He's responsible for strategy and performance of the business, which helps enable cell and gene therapy clients to develop breakthrough technologies for research projects. He started his career at Novagen in manufacturing and operational roles, and he moved to Merck's KGaA Bioscience division, ultimately leading their global custom service business unit. And then in 2009, he partnered with Aldevron to launch their new protein business unit here in Madison, and it's charted their growth ever since. Tom is a great connector of people and ideas and in the community, and he and I often talk about an idea called the Liquid Network, which is something I've built into my strategic thinking here at University Research Park. So he'll be a great addition to our conversation. Aldevron partners with Madison in a bunch of ways. They support the Masters in Biotech program at the university, and they work with the College of Engineering with a variety of projects. So welcome, Tom. We have Anna Hooker here today. Anna is the Senior Vice President for Operations at Exact Sciences. There, she's responsible for operations spanning clinical laboratories, manufacturing, supply chain, service and support, and quality assurance, including 1,700 employees across 6 US locations. Her experience also includes managing the genetics, oncology, and anatomic pathology divisions for ARUP laboratories for 17 years. Anna joined Exact Sciences in 2013, where she launched and scaled the clinical lab and manufacturing operations to support the growth of Cologuard, the flagship product for Exact Sciences, and led a 2020 pivot, which maybe we'll get a chance to hear about, to support COVID-19 testing in the state of Wisconsin. She serves on several nonprofit boards, and I know she's passionate about mentoring women in STEM leadership. University Research Park recently partnered with Exact Sciences to build a new corporate headquarters, Innovation One, and we know that Exact Sciences is a big recruiter at UW-Madison, so we look forward to seeing lots of Badgers in that building over the coming years. Welcome, Anna. Kathy Rasmussen is currently the Assistant Director at the Forward Bio Institute at UW-Madison. She's got more than 20 years of experience in regenerative medicine and translational biomanufacturing research. She's the inventor of 4 US patents and numerous international patents. Her expertise spans strategic planning, cross-functional leadership, product development, extramural fundraising, and scientific communications. Dr. Rasmussen was part of the pioneering team at Biotech, which is now a Mallinckrodt company, where she managed the platform R&D and directed preclinical studies for the company's pipeline, including StrataGraft regenerative skin tissue, which just got their FDA approval in June. So we're all excited about that here. Dr. Rasmussen has served on the steering committee for Women in Biohealth for the past 4 years or so. Stratotech to me is another classic example of what the university ecosystem aims to do. It sort of demonstrates the way basic federally funded research can lead to serendipitous discoveries, become a company, and ultimately transform the way therapy is delivered to patients in a way that really provides a lot of benefits. So we were very proud to partner with Stratotech over the last few years to help them build a cGMP facility to manufacture that product. So welcome, Kathy. I'll try not to call you Dr. Rasmussen too much, but welcome. You know, when we were getting ready for this panel, we had a pretty interesting conversation, and one of the phrases that you threw out, Tom, I loved so much. I wrote it down. You mentioned the phrase unconstrained thinking. So I'm hoping you will get us started today by telling us a little bit about Aldevron's journey and the value of thinking big.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. And just want to double check everyone can hear me. Aaron, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sounds great. It's great to be on this panel. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Kathy Carter and Anna. They're inspirational leaders in this city. And so excited to participate in this. Thank you for the invite. When I think about unconstrained thinking, when often you start a company, we put unintentional constraints on certain things. And a lot of it has to do with how we think. Constraints come from money, for example. We think about how much money we have to spend or how much money we have to raise, and that puts constraints on our thinking. We think about the calendar. That puts constraints on our thinking. We think fiscal years. And scientists actually inherently want experiments to work. So they have a positive control, they have a negative control, they try to constrain the variables in a sense of an experiment to make sure that the results are valid. And all of that type of thinking sometimes leads to us missing what might be possible from a potential standpoint. And just a quick example of this is that we did a kind of a management team meeting with Aldevron in 2015. We were a much different company in 2015, but we were thinking about this whole idea of big, audacious goals. And one of the things that Michael Chambers said was that, people put together future visions and objectives based on size with money and things like this, how big our company, market leader, and things like this. One of the things that he had said that stuck with me was that, what if we would cure 10 million people by 2025? And so we put that out there, and we started thinking about it. And of course, we've been building this company a brick at a time. But as cell and gene therapy has evolved, we're involved in hundreds of clinical trials now in gene editing, which we weren't involved in 2015. But in gene editing, we have eight clients have their INDs filed with Aldevron GMP manufactured Cas9 to edit cells to cure people. And we made a public announcement with our relationship with Moderna. And so we have been involved in way more than affecting 10 million patients by 2025. And it's only 2021. So what my message is to you guys, don't get constrained on actual finances and science. Think about like those amazing things that could be possible, and dream big, I guess is my comment there.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to bring Carter in here for a minute. Carter is, a serial entrepreneur. You've been involved in lots of companies, and as Tom was just talking about thinking big, one of the things that kind of occurred to me is, on one hand, you need to have big, audacious goals that you can chase, and on the other hand, you also sometimes have to really focus on what you can get done and where you can find early traction. You've been involved in companies in both Madison and Milwaukee. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how you've overcome some of these roadblocks to make incremental progress towards really setting a startup up for success, while also keeping your eye on this unconstrained blue sky thinking that Tom's talking about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aaron, and the panel for having me today. I think that for me, a comment that Tom had made during our pre-meeting was, that Aldevron had been successful by selecting objectives that they could win at. And I feel like from the past 4 or 5 years in trying to spin out companies, to me, it made me think about what our particular region is good at. And I feel like it can really be defined under the umbrella of outcome-based measures in healthcare. So I guess what I'm getting at is the healthcare system is shifting towards paying for treatments and procedures and products that have a defined outcome. Exact is a stellar example of that. Obviously, we have large life insurance companies here that have financing mechanisms which will support this sort of effort to be successful in a particular area. So for me, all of the spin outs that I've been involved in they all fit within that bucket of outcome-based measures, whether it's precision medicine to target treatments to patients more accurately, or if it's the regenerative medicine, which intends to, under the big idea essentially of replacing cells that are missing in patients and that are the underlying cause of the disease. Those are, I think, the big ideas. At the ground level, it's really about just getting the first 5 or 10 million to launch the company. And I think that in my case anyway, that those funds did not come, for example, from the hubs on the coast. They came from strategic investors, in or outside of our region, large companies like Fujifilm, institutions like Indiana University or Children's Hospital of Minnesota. So that's where I've been successful in securing the seed capital needed to launch some of these efforts. I think probably the biggest barrier to spinning out technologies and getting it financed is that you have to simultaneously solve for the politics of it. Fujifilm, for example, had never done a spin out, and so that was a complex exercise. You have to solve for the technology risk. You know, are you really chasing the right technology for this particular big idea? And then the financing, you know, you have to solve for that as well, which is a challenge in the Midwest. And so those would be the barriers. But I think the other question you'd asked was, you know, where do you, you know, take confidence that your idea is worth pursuing? And it really comes down to the initial investors, the bridge investors, the initial strategic partnerships you have. For example, Olver and Tom mentioned the Cas9 protein that they've delivered to a lot of products and patients. And we're aligning with that technology as well. And so those kind of strategic partnerships are critical because they allow you to use your capital efficiently and de-risk your path forward. So I'll stop at that.
When you were talking, you know, one of the things we might have entrepreneurs listening who are in other industries. And when you said 5 to 10 million, you know, I wasn't sure if you were talking about money at first, and I realized you were talking about your early capital, but there's just a different level of scale in life sciences. You know, you can't raise $100,000 and build an algorithm running on coffee and pizza in your, you know, dorm room and launch a company that way in life sciences. So this idea that you have to have a big target, a big market, something that really motivates the team and the investors and helps you build a culture, which I know we're going to talk about. And on the other hand, you also have to have this ruthless entrepreneurial focus to really figure out what's going to move the needle early on.
Yeah, I think for me, it was helpful simply to be naive to the fact that it's very hard to raise capital in the flyover zone, so to speak, for efforts that are not profit loss driven. If you can establish a P&L positive business, you know, you can grow it to potentially any scale. But if it's a regulated market like diagnostics or therapeutics, it gets to be more complicated to raise the money since there won't be a return for some time. So I think that's the main, that'd be my response to your point.
Yeah. Let me bring Kathy in here. You know, Kathy, you know, at Stratitech, there was a whole range of potential products that the company looked at. You were working on managing, leading many of those. And at the same time, you also had to focus on what you were going to put into clinical trials and shoot at first. Mm-hmm. And now at the university, you're working to develop a platform capacity really to enable more breakthroughs. Tell us a little bit about that work and what's the value of a platform, and does that contradict with the idea of focus, or is it helpful?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you for including me on this panel. This is a wonderful opportunity. And circling back to kind of the journey of bench to bedside with Stratitech really was foundational to my goal of coming back to University, Wisconsin-Madison, and forming this platform capacity that you're speaking to, which is essentially looking at the research enterprise and understanding how to think differently. And so instead of thinking about research of technologies, examine what could be potential high impact products. And so that perspective is different. When you were trained as a research scientist, you fundamentally think about things differently than product development. But obviously, you know, the university is such a powerful engine of innovation here in our ecosystem. And yet we need to kind of bridge that gap, that last stage toward commercialization for these technologies that are being developed, and focus in, as you were indicating, on what a true potential could be. So you may have a research program that is working to, just being very broad here, address a fundamental cure toward cancer. And it is broadly applicable to a number of different types of indications. However, how do you think about that from a research perspective to narrow in on the best possible target indication? What exact cancer? Are you looking at your patient population? Are you looking at the regulatory path? So what we've done here at the Forward Bio Institute is really start thinking about a strategic planning perspective and educating both the faculty as well as the trainees on campus to think about this broadly and integrate these things into their research program as early as possible. So if they are working toward a specific goal of commercialization, understanding what they need to do beyond a technical capacity. So what do they need to think about in terms of business formation? What are the legal hurdles? What are the regulatory challenges? And start addressing those early. When can you start building in quality? We've got such a rich ecosystem here in Madison, and we have so many people with this experience that you can really only gain from being in industry. And so we're really trying to bring some of those learnings back from our broad partnerships across the community and invite them to share their knowledge and share best practices.
Great. Let me bring Anna in here too. So you get your big idea, you have something that you're chasing, 10 million patients by 2025, or, addressing an underserved diagnostic market like Exact Sciences is chasing with Cologuard. But, you have to scale that up and turn your big idea into the capacity to serve those markets, which is really your role. And of course, Exact Science has, to Carter's point, raised a lot of money along the way to help it do that. So what are some of the challenges from scaling a small technology firm into a major leader in a big technology firm? What have you learned along the way from tackling that challenge?
Quite frankly, Aaron, you learn every day something new, right? Scaling is an interesting challenge. For Exact is that you both have to scale the manufacturing and the testing and do that balance at the same time. So, and those are two different beasts, right? So what you learn is you really need to look at the ecosystem and you need to focus on what you have at hand and consider your whole thing, right? You're talking about materials, people, technology, automation, and you have to think about it as an orchestra where you are really pulling the right instruments at the right time as you scale, and you cannot forget another as you are looking at the big picture. So you may have to start at a certain scale, and you need to be thinking constantly about what is next, and looking at forecasts and looking at what is the big picture and how you're going to get there, and have that plan where you are plugging those pieces as you move along the compendium. And that to me is the biggest challenge, is to balance, okay, when do I increase my automation from this level of automation to this next level of automation? And how do I do that transition? Because once you have a product out, now you're dealing with regulatory submissions and changes in that and filings, etc., that you have to take into consideration. And those to me are the learnings that you need a really good project management system so you can really position the organization for success. And at the same time, you need to be balancing your culture so they all play nice and they all work well together and they're all moving on the same direction. So it's a constant balance to be able to scale something to this level. And it starts really early on. You have to be thinking about this from the beginning, right? When Carter was saying about all the different balancing the focus and the risk, and Tom was saying, don't forget about the big picture. You need somebody that is crazy audacious about that huge goal and what is possible and that vision. And then you need somebody that can really program that into what does that look in reality to get there. So you can plan your publications, your strategy with payers. All those things have to be very together so you can have a product that can be launched and be successful.
Yeah. So, if people are out there listening, and they're small firms, they don't have necessarily the scale of Exact Sciences with thousands of employees. They might have to have people that are wearing multiple hats, but they might face this challenge, right? That on one hand, they want to pursue Tom's idea of unconstrained thinking, and on the other hand, they also have these nuts and bolts issues that you're thinking about. What advice would you give folks that are trying to figure out how to double the size of their company?
I think we all start small. We all wear many, many hats. And I think it's a matter of bringing talent that early on, well, as soon as you can and you can afford it, that you can hand on pieces of this and they start thinking on their area about growing that part of their orchestra, right? And you are connecting the dots as you grow it. So don't limit your talent and understand that talent comes in different ways. When you are a startup, you have talent that is taking you to that next level, but that talent may not have the right perspective on bigger thinking or bigger operations. So making sure that you are adding people that bring in those perspectives and those experiences so you can continue to not just think big, but how do you operationalize that and what is possible, right? Because there are many different ways of looking at these things and not everybody comes with the whole recipe book of how to do it. So bringing new innovative ideas or how other people have done it or how other companies have done it is important, and then you adapt it to what works for your particular moment and time in your organization. So bring talent is my point, right? Make sure that you are bringing different perspectives to a table and don't get pigeonholed because that's how you constrain your thinking.
Yeah. So we're going to keep talking here as a group, but for the folks that are out there listening, if you want to put questions into the Q&A right now, you can. If you want to go and upvote those to bring them to the top, please feel free to do that. We're definitely going to leave some time to come back to audience questions towards the end. But I want to stay on this theme that Anna's talking a little bit about here with talent. So, to chase these big ideas and to build platform capacity, to scale, to raise the capital you need, to bring your team together around both strategic opportunities, but also operational excellence, you really have to have ways of guiding that. And one of the things that I think is a theme across your organizations is building culture as a guide and an aid. How do you think about that? When do you start thinking about company culture, and how should companies go about designing their culture?
Well, I can jump in. I can jump in there, Aaron, and I, Carter, Kathy, and Anna, I'm sure have great ideas on that too. But just kind of weaving a couple things. We started with the conversation of unconstrained thinking and think big, and of course we want people to think big. But if you're thinking big and you're not making payroll, your big vision actually is not going to ever come to a good result. So, I talked about 2015, how we had this think big vision, and we're continuing to think that way now because we can realize that we can see some of those things. But in 2009, when we started the organization, it was survival mode. And it's so is with Exact and it's with Vascugen and Stratotech. When you're in startup mode, you have to execute that day, that week, that month to stack wins and build confidence that you're heading in the right direction. And as you do that, you can get out of survival mode, and then you can get hopefully into a sustainable mode where you can actually then start thinking more about culture. And for us, it was probably when we were about maybe 15 people-ish type, when we really started intentionally thinking about culture. We developed a culture development team. We have a strategy around culture that's based off of performance, continuous learning, and caring for our team. And we brick by brick have built that. Katie Rogers, who was one of the original people who started with the company, wanted to intentionally be a part of what we would be in the future. And so she started the culture development team when we were 15 people. And now it's like an opt-in thing where people are a part of this team and this grassroots. We have a bunch of young people, people who've been here a while, are now intentionally helping us build our culture. And I know it's a differentiator for us in recruiting. I know it's a differentiator for us in performance. And so it definitely is a part of what allowed us to scale where we're at. And one last thing I'll mention is that you have to think about it when you're in the smaller version of yourself, right? And we did it when we're about 15 people. We're 70 plus here now in Madison and 700 across our 2 sites. So you can't implement it when you're over 100 or 200, then all of a sudden think that you're going to like embed this way of thinking about what makes you special. So I'll stop there, but culture definitely is one of Aldevron's differentiators here in Madison.
Yeah,
And I'm happy. Oh, sorry, Kathy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the degree of team cohesion is incredibly important for success. And so what I had found with kind of the initial team at Biotech is the culture that we built was surrounded our mission, which was really helping patients. And there's that common theme between all of what the panelists here have to say today is we all are very dedicated to that end goal of helping people. And that in itself is a huge driver, and the team aspect helps select for building that culture. But again, being very vigilant as to who you recruit onto that team at what stage and what they're bringing, not just experience, but their perspectives is incredibly important. And I'll defer to Anna for the further conversation.
Kathy, no, I was going to touch on some of that too, and I agree. I think it's very important to, when we're building culture, to think about how are you setting your processes to be sustainable as you grow, and how do you grow your processes on people as you grow everything else, because your main focus is time is money, and you have a speed to market that you need to be consistent with, right? So you need to be thinking about how do you emphasize to the teams the importance of quality regardless of speed, and continue to balance those two things as you move forward. So having that sense of urgency in your culture and build a culture that wants to just throw it all in to take care of our patients and be the best they can be with the highest quality, and just move on things quickly so we can progress and make the progress at the right time as you need it is very important for that. So building that energy and that excitement with your teams, with the culture, and showing them how you support them, how you care about their well-being and all those things constantly is very important on those building blocks that Tom mentioned, because I know that's what Tom is doing too right now. And I think employees notice and people want to go and work with you, right? And it's really important to cross-pollinate those things across.
You know, when I'm scrolling on Instagram or something, I will notice all these ads for people who want to sell me a shirt that I don't have to tuck in, or a custom fitted blazer, or a coffee cup with some cool slogan on it. And I think about life sciences and the impact that it has on patients. To me, COVID-19 really raised the profile of life science and showed the importance of focusing on healthcare technologies and how critical that is to society. Do you find that selling diagnostics or therapeutics or things that make a difference in people's healths is an easier way to build that culture and build momentum? Or can you do it around anything? Can you do it around coffee mugs and tuckable or untuckable shirts?
Can do around anything really when you think about it, but what we have in diagnostics and proteomics and all these things that are bringing that patient care is your mission is a very powerful denominator to get people to be on that cohesive platform and be able to move towards something bigger than yourself, and having that impact in population health, having that impact on a group of patients is big. So to me, that's what we have that differentiated us from other type of retails. But everybody can spin their story based on what they do, right? And that's a whole different conversation. But I think our commonality among all of us on this call is that no matter what we work on in biotech, we are touching lives of patients in some shape or form, or customers that will be touching lives of patients. And that mission really can unite a group to be very passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, because I have the opportunity to work with a lot of students, particularly graduate students here on campus, and culture is incredibly important to those who are currently training. They have it as a high criteria in terms of what they're looking for in not just career advancement, but their initial starting opportunity within any organization. And so I know it's an incredibly competitive landscape right now for attracting talent, whether they're fresh out of school or whether they're doing a transition in terms of their overall career development, but having a culture that really promotes not just responsibility, but granting authority as those people develop their career and their skill sets, and then allowing them to, try new things. And as a startup, you're always trying new things. And there's this fear of failure, but you kind of, again, with that big picture, you kind of need to reach and see what might work out. And there's a degree of freedom that you need to allow to explore those other ideas, as long as they're within the critical mission path of the startup. But if everyone on the team is empowered to do that, then I think that it helps build that overall culture that Tom and everyone is speaking to.
So there's a question in the chat actually about that theme, about empowering employees. The questioner points out that turnover is high in the life science industry, and that perhaps focusing on empowering employees might make them more engaged with their work. I can imagine that, especially as you scale and add employees, on one hand, you want to empower people, and on the other hand, you also have to marshal them around your big idea and your culture. So, Carter, when you're building a company, how do you think about, integrating new talent, retaining talent, getting it engaged?
Well, I think that the turnover here, is substantially less than in the tech hubs, just because there's so much more activity and deal flow happening there. I mean, I can't speak for the larger companies, like Exact or Olver, but I'm assuming, they probably have relatively good retention just because of the quality of life and all of the things that you have here that are more in flux on the coastal hubs. Culture, I was thinking about what people were describing, and I don't know that we haven't yet had a tangible effort to create culture. It's just more like little things that bring levity. We give names to the robots that clean our floors, or little stuff. We probably need more of that, frankly. But I think right now, for the ventures that I'm involved in any case, the mission of the company is the attractor. It's not yet the corporate culture. I would add that at least in the 5 or 6 different companies that I've traversed in my career, some of them have a culture, which is interesting and fun, and others have a cult, which is unhelpful and irrational. So I don't know where the balance of that is, but to me that seems like that would be the main thing to solve for if they were trying to attract at least people of my mentality. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Aaron, but
what's the difference between a culture and a cult? And how do you know which one you have?
I think it's if you start to, at least in my mind, if you start to notice things that seem irrational, for example, let's say you're trying to ideate to the benefit of the company, and there's a bunch of irrational barriers for to that, then or if I don't know, the executives become the forefront of the mission as opposed to the mission itself, right? And things like that. So but I think that every company has their own way of balancing that probably as they grow, and I haven't had to deal with that yet.
I just wanted to follow up with one comment and what Kathy was saying, because she's training like the next generation scientist, and having a mission-based culture is important to young people. And part of the reason is and many of you have gone through a BS or a PhD program, science is hard. It's hard to get through the classes. There's a lot of effort, but the only way that you actually go through like the hard work of science in school and graduate school is because you do want to make an impact. Almost everyone who gets into science Like the idea of curing somebody from a rare disease where a parent had no hope is like an amazing kind of mission that kind of motivates, and it motivates us here, right? We talked about, curing 10 million people, and so this has become more tangible to us more recently because cell and gene therapy have had a lot of successes in gene editing itself and sickle cell disease, so forth. It's like this idea that you can do that is amazing. And so you're right, people work basically at some level for money, right? But the discretionary effort that people give over and above the idea of like what they work for money or a 40-hour paycheck is because they work for the cause and they work for their why. Many of you people have heard Simon Sinek talk, and he's right on, right? That discretionary effort is the effort you get that builds the capacity, that creates like the energy that Anna is talking about. And so culture, people are natural at it from a leadership standpoint. It's got to be genuine. If it's not natural or genuine, people won't follow it.
Yeah, and there's also a very big differentiator between what you need to be successful when you're starting a company, of how you work with the science, the deep science, and when you need to pivot a little bit and bring other characteristics and personalities into it. Because collaboration is very important, and it's not just collaboration in the sense of being in a meeting and agree or whatever. It's more of really having crossing the swim lanes that people call, and being able to collaborate and execute under those circumstances. And in academia, sometimes people want to own the whole cradle to grave, and they want to control every little thing of their environment because that's how they run their labs, that's how they do this thing. So when they get plopped into a company that is operating differently and it has other priorities or same priorities but different ways of working, and how do you collaborate, how do you integrate, how do you ideate and solve issues, if they learn from the early stages when they are in academia some of the skill sets to be successful when they come to industry and be able to speak the commercial language or work with other departments of a company that have to propel that company forward, will be to their advantage, because sometimes that academic hat is so strong that inhibits them from being able to do that, and then you see the turnover, right? And you want to avoid that by establishing the expectations early on of what skill sets you need to, or what muscles you need to develop, because they have the same muscles, right? You just use different, instead of using a hammer for everything, you may have to have a larger toolbox to take your supplies from.
Yeah, I mean, Anna, that's one thing that we try to stress on campus is that, you may be a wonderful researcher, but you always have room to grow in these other areas that you don't have formal training in, and get yourself into a situation where you are working with a company that allows you the opportunities to grow those areas. So case in point, Tom Carter and you are very familiar with the regulated degrees associated with manufacturing something for a diagnostic or a therapeutic. And so what a GMP environment requires is something that we try to stress. And then you understand there are individuals who are true researchers who would never be comfortable nor happy in a GMP environment. So don't try to force that. Have them grow in an environment where they can be their best selves and be most useful to the organization, and bring in people who are amenable to learning the GMP skill set and grow it that way. Not everybody has to have a PhD, and just because someone has a wonderful scientific idea doesn't necessarily mean they're the person to take it all the way through. Team identification is something that is critically important from the outset all the way through these early stages. Who's doing what to their best ability, and who can you recruit in to identify the gaps, and then find people that can fill in those gaps. So I hear what you're saying loud and clear.
Tell us quickly, Kathy, what GMP is for folks that might not know.
Good manufacturing practices. So it's a federally codified system of how you have good documentation, control of your systems, what in-process checks, output checks you have. That's an incredibly simplified version of it. But basically, if something was to go wrong during a manufacturing run, it allows you to have the ability to find what went wrong, what the documentation was, what was the traceability. It's mandated by FDA for these types of products.
Basically, federal regulation for life science manufacturing processes. Is that fair?
Yes.
So back to this question, we're sort of talking about culture, and now we're kind of talking about talent and how you integrate and empower talent. How do you attract talent, and how do you get the right talent? Is it hard in Madison? Is it getting better? How do you think about that? And maybe we can start bleeding into capital too. Which comes first, the talent or the money?
Well,
Nobody
I think, yeah, maybe just a couple of things around. I mean, we've in the first 6 months, we've hired of this year, we've hired 31 people and we've offered 35 people. And so we've been doing a good job, I think, of closing on our primary candidates. And there's a couple of things that I think are important when you're telling the story of your company, because people want to emotionally connect, in a sense, to kind of a vision that aligns with what's very interesting to them. And a lot of that has to do with the growth of the company. The company is growing quickly. Exact has grown quickly, and is like being a part of their mission. It's pretty easy to get on board with that. So I know that they've been able to successfully recruit nationally. So one is, can you clearly explain basically the opportunities that might be at a particular place? And if the company is growing, it's easier to tangibly explain that. Second, it's like, what is the work environment? The work environment is super important. And so I talked a little bit about a culture that's, client focused, mission driven on curable therapies, but wrapped in this idea of like strong performance. If you have a performance culture, it naturally attracts people who want to perform at a high level. Right? If you do not perform at a high level, the business basically goes away at some point. And so performance is a centerpiece to our culture, and it attracts talented people who want to really go for it. The continuous learning part is super important because, in science, we're all like lifelong learners. If you have like an environment of learning, it creates excitement. And we talked about caring, which is super important. The empathy that you show to employees to help them navigate life as the company continues to grow is super important. So if you can tell that story, Aaron, right, that really helps to attract talent. And that talent could be from anywhere in the country. It could be from Madison. It could be from university setting.
This is good for me to hear, because we're hiring right now for a new lab manager. So what's the environment like for talent for the other companies that are here, for the university? Are you finding what you need? And are you finding it locally, or are you recruiting from outside?
Yeah, it depends which area are you talking about, right? Because in terms of talent, when I talk about our company, we have a wide variety of talent needs. The university is a great feeder for us for talent of graduates to come and work in the laboratories in both, R&D or technical positions in the lab is fantastic. And hopefully it's also in the business area in some of the other arenas. We do get project management expertise too. I mean, that's to me one of the anchors to Madison, right? Or the anchor is the university talent pool that we get here. Now, are we graduating medtechs at the right rate for us to be able to utilize? Probably no, but that's the case in the whole country, right? It's a field that is hard to get people interested and hard to graduate a lot of people. So continue to partner with those programs both at the university and at the technical college level is important, right?
Yeah, I guess, Aaron, my comment would be that we hired about half of our team, mostly the scientists, from outside of the state at academic institutions, but those were all people who had domain-specific expertise in our area and who wanted to live here, who had either gone to school here before or sort of knew the area. And then the other half of our company, which is really manufacturing experts, came from local industry. From larger companies here that you know are a place where they can learn the type of experience as a small entity need on day one. So that's been you know how we've grown, and so far it hasn't been limiting, but it may be that if we're gonna, for example, double our footprint or our size, you know, in a short period of time, maybe that will be a challenge. We'll see.
You know, a lot of people talk about talent, not only in life sciences, but across all industries these days. There's a real conversation in the business community going on about how people are going to get enough talent. Capital is another topic that's like that. People, I think, perceive Wisconsin as underpunching compared to the innovation that is here in terms of capital. You know, how do you perceive those two as barriers to growth? Which is harder to raise?
I guess I can go first. You know, like I said in the earlier, I haven't been successful thus far at raising capital from marquee coastal VCs, although I've certainly met with pretty much all of them for different discussions. I think that it would be helpful if the state had representation in those cities. You know, so if you had an office where directors who represent the investors, I think, you know, and you can have a board meeting there virtually or in person, I think that would improve our chances of deal flow for early stage tech companies or biotech companies. I also think that the type of stuff, for example, that Exact is doing with their corporate venture efforts, and after we spun out Opsys from Fuji, they recognized that as a deficit-informed corporate venture fund as well. And then, you know, the life insurance companies here obviously have corporate venture funds that are investing in a variety of things. So I think that that is a key part to the early capital path, because if it provides a validation, they would take a minority position, so you don't have a large company kind of muscling your startup around. So to me, that's critical, and I think would be a straightforward way to take a few steps towards improving the capital deal flow here. One other thing I'll mention is just that where there's IP that's idle, whether it's in a large company or in an academic center, et cetera, I think there should be effort within those large entities to codify how they might spin out companies, because it will make it a lot easier for internal entrepreneurs, either at the institution or the company, to figure out how to do that. It sort of alleviates the need to have a political battle internally about it, and there's an actual process for it. I think that would really help, because every large company I've come across has you know, sort of a mountain or boneyard of IP that could be developed to their own benefit, but it's not their focus at the moment, and an internal entrepreneur might be able to do that.
Yeah,
That's an interesting
to Carter's
concept.
point.
Yeah, go ahead.
To Carter's point, you know, there's a lot of individuals who have IP here at the university who do have ideas on spinning that technology out, but primarily they're academic trained, and so they don't have a lot of understanding of how to go after those capital. What are the initial first steps? So we've got a wonderful ecosystem here that is developed in terms of giving some training to people on campus who may be exploring this path, and we've got external resources like CTC through SBIR opportunities to start some seed funds that way. But every group that I speak to still says that they feel like they're missing some piece of the puzzle. You know, that there's some bit of information that they don't feel like they quite have in terms of how to navigate this capital acquisition stage. And I mean, it speaks to what Carter was saying in regards to, kind of some of the challenges of utilizing the IP that you have for at what price point, as well as how do you start building into a network that has a larger degree of capital availability for investment.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that with the acquisitions we have been making in the coast areas, there will be more visibility to what Madison has to offer as we get more influx of people in and out, and knowing that those are expensive geographies and they are expensive to develop things, and you are better off developing things in the Midwest in terms of your scale, right? Back to the scalability question. If you're going to scale a lab, a big lab, you're going to get real estate in Madison before you go to, say, San Francisco. It's not available, right? It's an economic, just the space is not there. And if it is, the premium is huge. But again, the visibility of, hey, Madison has a lot to offer may start being a way of bringing more people to the conversation. So Carter has more calls that people listen and want to come and invest in Wisconsin.
So there's a lot of chatter out there about companies across technology industries looking to the Midwest. You hear about the population decline in San Francisco. You hear about companies enabling more remote work. And there's this theory that more and more companies like Zendesk might pop up with major centers in Madison. And certainly there's great examples, right? Illumina is a company that's really grown from headquartered in San Diego area, but really growing in Madison. So you see a little bit about that. Google, Facebook have, or Microsoft rather, have facilities in Madison. But do you think that's real? Are we actually gonna be able to attract growth and money and people from the coast?
You need the elements that they have there too, right? It's again a conglomerate of things we need in Madison to support that as well. You need the restaurant scene to continue to be what we have and scale it. You need the entertainment, the ability. We have a great outdoors network, and I think that that attracts a lot of people too, because they don't have that in the cities. But cross-pollinating that with some of the things that they look for their work-life balance is important for us to continue to invest in Madison to attract talent. Yeah.
Do other folks want to chime in on that?
I just was going to say that, we've come a long way building the critical mass of this ecosystem here. And so, there's hundreds of life science companies in the state, and a lot of them are in Madison. So, I mean, I think the critical mass helps a lot, in case things obviously don't work out at one organization, there's other options for people. So I just would leave it at that.
Kathy, there's a question in the chat for you that's sort of along the same lines here. We used to hear a lot, and we still hear a lot about the brain drain, graduates coming out of UW-Madison at various levels and leaving the area for employment opportunities. Do we risk suffering from the reverse problem of seeing our talent leave?
That's a really good question. I think there's a certain degree of that we're seeing, and it really depends upon their overall career path. If you're talking about someone who's a graduate student versus someone who's a bachelor's degree, in terms of what their overall aspirations are for career development. One thing that I will say is with the pandemic, with the remote work situation, there's that increased flexibility where someone can stay in Madison and yet technically work for someone else. And so, kind of in a way, there's a concern about intellectual poaching in the sense of, so the money and the headquarters stay on the coast, but the workforce is remote and located in the Midwest. And so it kind of speaks to what Anna was saying about, leveraging what we have here as far as our culture, but it still speaks to what Carter was saying about kind of bringing those corporate centers to the Midwest. The brain drain, I think, is in life sciences is less problematic now because, as Tom was saying, we've got a critical mass, and we have a lot of opportunity. I've been in Madison since '93, and I've never seen anything quite like this in terms of just open availability. And some of the recent graduates that we've had have had multiple offers, and basically the pick of what they wanted to do. So less so.
It's interesting to me. I sometimes have the sense that we have reached sort of an inflection point where, you know, even if you look at some of the company paths on the call here, Tom was at Novagen, right, which got bought by Merck and ultimately left Madison. You know, Kevin Conroy, before he was at Exact Sciences, sold Third Wave to Whole Logic, which got moved out. Well, flash forward, you know, 10 or 15 years, and here's Mallinckrodt buying Stratotech and not only keeping it in Madison, but actually expanding its footprint in Madison, or Illumina buying Epicenter and expanding it, or Exact Science starting to buy biotech companies on the coast. So to me, it feels like that critical mass might finally be snowballing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case. And, you know, with, I think like something I think is gonna be great for the Madison community is Danaher, which is the company that just recently bought Aldevron. Danaher, a lot of people don't know too much about it, and the deal is not officially closed, so I can't talk too much about it, but they did have you know, there's a definitive agreement to buy Aldevron. And it's a company that hasn't promoted the corporation Danaher and the life science. People don't know it as much, but the brands within Danaher are well known. Of Cytiva, of Paul, of Beckman, of IDT. These are all, is in the life science portfolio, Danaher companies. And the company is, you know, overall, the company's over 20 billion in revenue. So one of the things that Madison has lacked is a big pharma here, right? And, you know, the closest thing we have really is, you know, AbbVie in Chicago, and Lilly, you know, in Indy. But I just wanted to mention that Danaher is going to bring a lot of horsepower to like genetic medicine. I feel like to Fargo and in Madison with their play they recently had. So I think that's going to help accelerate. And they're very well in tune what's going on in Madison. So I just wanted to mention that.
Aaron, standing on the outside of these big acquisitions, like Tom mentioned, or just looking at the value of companies like Exact, I guess what I appreciate is that there's a lot of recognition of value in the Midwest for companies. They're being valued highly, which I felt a lot of the investor trips out here were sort of looking to invest at lower value than they would see at the coast, right? Just that by default, the value here was lower. And I think that these acquisitions show that companies that are able to thread the needle and do have a big vision can be very, very valuable. I do think there are some cases certainly where, you know, if deal flow is coming from the coast and they want management to be on the coast, then that's kind of their prerogative, and it should be acceptable. There have been a couple of examples I have seen, however, where there's no distribution of equity between, you know, so like the equity resides on the coast and the, you know, the brain trust and the sort of operational effort resides here. And that doesn't seem really, you know, the way to advance the interests of the Midwest. But I don't think that's the norm. So, I mean, I think that the trend of high value companies being created in the Midwest, like Aldevron and Exact, and, you know, it's very encouraging. You know, it should encourage people and hopefully investors.
Are there other comments folks want to make on the panel? Otherwise, I want to make sure we get to some of these questions that are popping up in the chat too.
There was this one thing that I wanted to bring up, and I think it's not unique to the Midwest, but I think it's something that is special in the sense that I know the individuals on this panel are all involved in mentorship in some way, shape, or form. And that's the one thing that I find is to be a considerable strength in the Madison community, is this degree of fellowship between the startup community and our ecosystem, and people who are willing to reach out with advice, make connections, help with networking, and just really elevate the entire area out of an interest in building Madison as a center. So I just really wanted to call that out.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know Anna mentioned in her biography that she's passionate about mentoring people. How do you find people to mentor, and how do you find mentors if you want one?
Yeah, I think that goes back to the culture part, right? I think you can do intercompany mentorship and you can do external mentorship, right? So intercompany, we have been very intentional about building like actual mentoring programs now as we're bigger, where people can actually have mentors that are picked and across different set of people in the ecosystem. But I think the fellowship that Cassie mentioned is very important. And when you think about that mentoring outside, is that connections that we all have. It could be that I reach out to Tom and say, hey, Tom, I have this person that has expertise in protein and is very interested in cross-pollinating and learning from that. Do you want to meet with that person, or vice versa? We connect with each other that way and try to find opportunities for mentees, either with us personally or with other people in our networks. And I think that that's the key, that you are thinking, what is the mentee looking for? And can you fulfill that? Or do you need to look within your network to try to build that connection? And it again depends on the level of expertise the person brings to the table. What are they looking for in a mentor? And what is your role, right? For me, mentoring goes all the way down from, I'm part of Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I'm very passionate about that, and starting very early. And I will also work very closely with Maiden, which is in the IT sector here as well, and they're doing great work. So it really depends, where do you plug into that mentoring opportunity? But I think there's an opportunity everywhere you look, and it's part of my DNA. So hopefully we can continue to cross-pollinate that.
Is that built into the culture team, Tom?
Well, I love that you brought this up, Kathy and Anna. Your comments are great, because, at some level, we all have a responsibility, like Kathy had said, to raise other people up, right? And it's easier to do that at some point after you've had, at some level of business success, because you've learned something, through that process that you maybe, and if you have some success, you can share that, how did you do that? And so, I'm very interested in this, career development and talking about career paths, and sharing experiences is something definitely that I do personally. So I have people that I mentor that are in Fargo that work for Aldevron, and in Madison that are not like in my like a direct report to me. And so I just had a session yesterday with somebody on that's a mentoring type program that we run. So there's no doubt that is very important, and it's part, of our caring culture too. Like, if you care about somebody, you mentor them in a sense. And I'm open to mentoring people outside of Aldevron also. And we've had people from Anna's group, Tammy, who's a vice president at Exact, came and gave a leadership talk at Aldevron as part of our leadership program. So this is this cross-pollinating thing that Anna was mentioning.
Yeah, that's one of the great values of the ecosystem, right? That reminds me of the story about Aldevron and Exact Sciences sharing space early on, or Stratitech finding an early home in a Muris closet at the research park. And one of the great things about being in the community is the opportunity to cross-pollinate, and we'd love to see more of that. Let me go to the chat and pick up some of these questions here. And I apologize, some of these have been coming in, so we might be going back to revisiting some of the topics, but some of these are pretty interesting and specific questions. So I want to make sure we get into them. One of them I think is kind of asking a really interesting provocative question here, which is, are we overvaluing mission attractiveness? And is that actually a problem? And the questioner is sort of raising the idea that maybe in some cases, companies are saying, we have a great mission and it's so important that you should dedicate your life to it. And even if that means your work-life balance isn't very strong, or your quality of life isn't great because you're so dedicated to the mission. And within biotech and life sciences, you might have all kinds of companies that have kind of relatively comparable missions in terms of their nobility. So what's your reaction to that provocative question?
Well, I can start. I think it's very challenging for an entrepreneurial biotech company to be very focused on work-life balance from the beginning if they need to jump in that ecosystem to deliver something that can launch them to that next level. So there is like work hard, play hard, right? You need to build that culture where people understand the significance of staying focused and getting to where you need to get in order to launch, and then try to build within your company as you grow and as you have more resources, more successes, that work-life balance. So it kind of rebalances itself. But I don't think you can have both at the same time at certain levels of the growth of a company, at least in the beginning. Yeah, I think that is very challenging to have both. I'm being completely honest about it. I think it's the nature of the beast in biotech. It's hard to do that balance in the beginning.
Maybe just a couple of comments is that when you talk about like mission, you're talking about something that's aspirational that you want to do over a period of time, right? A long period of time. And so that means that it has to be sustainable. And so the culture that you build, of course, there's going to be ups and downs, especially in the beginning, right? Where there's 60, 70 hour plus weeks or something like that. But in the end of the day, everyone knows that 60, 70 hour plus weeks are not sustainable, nor is it healthy. And so that's how basically at some point you have to pivot basically to a sustainable thing. If you're really going to reach scale and achieve the mission, like to eradicate colon cancer, is something that's super important to Exact Science. And so I was with Kevin and Manish, in 2009 when they got started, because we were in the same facility. And of course, they were working long hours, and so was Aldevron, because we had no clients and no purchase orders. But as we have evolved, we have thought about sustainability, because at the end of the day, if you're a performance culture, one way for that to be sustainable is that there's work-life balance. If you have like a generation of heroes, or if you have like a small group of heroes that hold things together over a period of time, eventually it's going to fall apart. So it needs to be sustainable, and you still can go after your mission and make that sustainable depending on what stage you're at.
Yeah, and at our level, early stage, I think we don't really try to mandate anything specific other than performance towards our objectives. So we implemented an unlimited vacation policy because it's not really in our best interest to be tracking that. We're focused on our objectives that are right in front of us. And everyone also has a meaningful equity position, comparable to what they'd have at a biotech on the coast, for example. And I think that you can't solve for everybody's work-life balance at this stage, to Anna's point. And I kind of feel like nor should we. It's sort of like meddling with their life when they're joining a startup. There are just certain things that are clear, which is it can go to zero, and your equity position can go to zero, and you'll gain experience and you'll probably get another job right away. But a lot of things can go to zero if everything doesn't come together. So that doesn't necessarily force, a success, but it's hopefully a motivator that doesn't require us to, implement time cards with long hours and that sort of thing.
So another sort of provocative sort of benefits or employment question. Eileen agrees with Tom that we're reaching a critical mass of employment opportunities, which can be really helpful in attracting talent, but she's wondering about non-compete agreements and whether those can stifle an innovation ecosystem. I don't know if your companies use them or have them, but that's, you know, a controversial topic in a lot of tech industries. What are your thoughts on non-competes?
Aaron, did you do that is that for me, non-competes?
You know, she mentioned that she agreed with you, was sort of the
Oh.
jumping off point about the question.
Yeah.
You know, I think the argument is, you know, that non-competes kind of inhibit the free flow of talent across organizations, and that over time that tends to suppress the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And there's probably some research that shows that.
Yeah. So, well, you know, it's a big topic, non-competes, right? And so, you know, I just signed one actually. So with this Danaher acquisition, so it's pretty fresh for me. But like when someone pays a premium for something, they don't want me to start Aldebaran 2.0, you know, in the incubator over that you have here in the research park. So, you know, if someone makes an investment in you, you know, we have an obligation in a sense, you know, to make good on that investment. And so I'll just make that as one comment. I do think the legislation around non-competes really varies between states. And in some states they're difficult to defend. In some cases they're easier to defend. So people can make the conclusion that non-competes may stifle innovation. And I kind of understand what they're saying at some level with that. But to me, there are so many new things with AI coming on board here and new ways of thinking about how to do science. I think that there's still plenty of, let's call it, canvas for people to innovate around, even if non-competes are part of you know, how people operate. I'm not sure if I answered the question so well, but that's just the top of my answer.
Yeah, well, let me go to some other questions because we've got a bunch of interesting ones here. Are we going to see foundational business analysis and project management skills becoming more necessary in life science in the future?
100%. Yes, I think they're both skills that we need to have in the life sciences to be successful. The financial metrics and the forecasting and how to think about this business complex problems as you have limited resources and you're growing the business are very important. And project management is a necessity, right? Because a good project manager, no matter how big or how small you are, well, it matters how big you are, but it doesn't matter how small you are, you need a good project manager. When you get a big scale, you probably should pick a project manager with every project, that literally every project that you have, to take it to completion and to understand all the different points in the evolution of that project. These skills are very important. I don't know if any of you guys have a different opinion.
Yeah, it's something that we actually integrate into what we call our Innovators in Training program, because it's so critically important. And in terms of applying that knowledge, we ask those students, because most of them are graduate students, to start integrating that process into their graduate work or in some of the projects that they volunteer on. Because again, project management is at its base just strategic planning, and that's a huge just, but it's it's really learning how to kind of forecast appropriately. And there's things that, you know, bleed over into how to do your experiments efficiently. If you're a graduate student, that can be useful lessons for them to then take forward. So it's not a formal project management training program, but at least it's introducing them into the concepts. Similarly to what you're talking about, the financial aspects. When we're talking about startups, and there's so many ideas that come out of the university, there are choices that are made as in the moment that are useful and appropriate for a bench side scale or a price point because everyone's regulated to what their grant funds are. However, some of those choices can be incredibly limiting when you start talking about 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road. So telling the students how to give just a moment of thought toward maybe making a choice toward a different reagent that ultimately, even if it's a couple dollars more this year, it will save you time, money, effort 2, 3, 4 years down the road. So bringing that in much earlier in the overall educational program for these trainees is critically important here on campus.
So long as we're on the topic of campus, Pedro asked about organizational culture. So for students that have entrepreneurial inclinations, what's your opinion on dealing with universities that might be either directly or indirectly acting as gatekeepers of their students and perhaps nudging them or not nudging them into entrepreneurship? Are we good at that at the UW?
That's a good question, and it's a complex answer because it needs to be really defined. Are we talking about life sciences? Are we talking about computer sciences, physical sciences? Because there's a different propensity and acceptance of the culture in these different areas based off of what is deemed as successful in the commercial market. So AI obviously has a very different path than gene therapy. And really some of it is because of the emerging state of some of these life science-based technologies. There's just a lot more development that's required. So there is a push, and it's historical, to think about an academic path as opposed to an industry-based path. But I think it's changing because just the sheer numbers, the students are not ignorant of the fact of where their career opportunities lie. And so, really building toward their awareness is the only logical endpoint, in my opinion.
Yeah, I certainly can't speak to all universities, but I'm always struck when I'm down on campus at how many students are studying entrepreneurship in some way, taking some kind of class or thinking about entrepreneurship or participating in the new entrepreneurial residence halls or things like that. I think that's a trend among students at universities nationally.
Yeah, I would think that whether you're at an academic institution or a company, it's always sort of unfortunate if there's a barrier to somebody wanting to develop IP that is otherwise undeveloped or unpartnered or unlicensed. It's sort of hard to fathom in some ways why that would be the case in a company if it's idle and somebody wants to develop it and they're willing to put the time in, then eventually if they're successful, it'll flow back to the company. If it's an academic center, it's challenging to license IP and you spend a lot of money developing it, and so the question becomes, how long is it allowed to remain idle before it becomes available for people to develop who are motivated to do that? It seems like sort of a political question between the state, city, and university as to which streams of revenue are most important. Is it, lots of new startups and the tax revenues that some of them that are successful may generate? Is it cash flow for licenses that then flow into the university? What's most important, in terms of perspectives at different levels? Otherwise, there is probably quite a lot of entrepreneurial activity that doesn't happen because people aren't sure how to navigate that. And whether it's a company or an institution, having a codified process, I believe, for that would probably be helpful. Just some kind of boundaries or rules or startup structure or something specific so you don't have to have that debate internally.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're running out of time. I'd love to sneak in more questions, but I am required to start wrapping us up here. So Dr. Rasmussen, Carter, Tom, Anna, I want to thank you all for joining us. This has been really interesting. We covered a lot of ground. There's some great questions in the chat. So that remain. If you want to go in there, you maybe could type some answers to some of the folks that have posed some interesting questions. But I want to thank you for your time and then invite Mary to come back and help us wrap up here.
Thanks, Aaron. And I also want to echo my thanks to all of the panelists on behalf of the UW-Madison Innovate Network. We talked about the great fellowship in the startup community here and how players in the community help elevate others. And for each of the panelists, your participation in this panel really exemplifies that, lending your time and expertise to the Forward Fest audiences. For the audience, there are more programs coming in Forward Fest from the Innovate Network. The Biotech Spotlight continues. On Monday, we'll have a program on how AI and advanced computing are driving innovation in biohealth. And on Tuesday, you can get a look at the Forward Biolabs that's been mentioned, the incubator in University Research Park for life science businesses. And you'll hear some flash talks from some of their member startups. And then on Thursday, the last Innovate Network program is Launch, Learn, and Pivot Madison Startup Stories. And you'll hear from a really diverse group of entrepreneurs who've self-funded and started their own businesses. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our panelists. Watch for a follow-up email from the Innovate Network about connecting to resources and learning opportunities, and enjoy the rest of Forward Fest.